Hey everyone, welcome back. In this video, I'll walk you through how you can create a to-do list application using Supabase and React. This application will be a CRUD application where you are able to create, read, update, and delete database entries. My goal for this video is to show you how an application interacts with a database and encourage you to build an app upon learning from this video. Now, in terms of how this will happen, I will first create a React app with Vite, and then I'll head to Supabase and walk you through the project creation process along with the database setup, and then we will go back to our React app, set up the necessary file structures, and build our application. Without further ado, let's begin. So first, we'll be creating a React application using Vite, and to do this, I have my terminal opened up inside a directory called YouTube code, which will contain my applications folder. And here I'm going to run npm create vite at latest React Supabase app, and this will be the name of my React application here. And then I'm going to do a double hyphen space followed by another double hyphen with template, and we're going to set our template to be React. And I'm using npm here, so if you're using a different package manager, please check the description below to access the Vite documentation, which will have the respective commands for your package manager. So now I'll hit enter, and if you give it a few seconds, it will complete the creation of the project. And I'm going to change into this directory by doing cd react supabase app, and then I'm going to do npm install to install the necessary packages for our default application. And if you give it a few seconds, it will complete that process. And now that we've completed this step, let's head to Supabase and create a project, which includes setting up the database for our application. And once we're done with that, we can open this application in our code editor and configure it to connect with our Supabase project to then build it. So now I'm going to log into Supabase. So first you need to access this web page, which can be found at https://supabase.com. And once you're on the home page, you're just going to click Start Your Project. And upon clicking this, you're going to be greeted with this form asking you to sign in. So if you do not already have an account with Supabase, please pause the video and create one before proceeding. Since I already have an account, I will log in like normal and walk you through the process. So upon logging in and starting a new project, you'll be greeted with this form asking you to fill out details regarding an organization. For the name of the organization, I'll simply put React Supabase app, and I'll leave the other values as they are. Upon creating the organization, you'll be asked to fill out additional details, which should show in a few seconds. And here, the organization name is what we filled out in the previous box, and for our project name, I will simply set it to React To-Do List App. Then I will type in a secure database password, and this is of course something you choose that you think is secure. And you may leave the region as the default, as we do not need to worry about the region. And then you don't need to worry about the security options or the advanced configuration. Now we're going to click Create New Project, which should take a few seconds, and you should see a web page that looks similar to this, and this is the page where our project is currently being set up, and if we give it some time, it'll complete that process. Here, my project has been created, and now that this project has been created, we're going to set up the database for our project and also connect our project to our React application, which I've opened up in my VS Code window. So before we proceed with setting up our database, we want to first ensure that we extrapolate the necessary credentials and store them within our React application to establish a secure connection to our Supabase project. So to do this, I'm going to head to the sidebar here in Supabase, and then I'm going to select Project Settings. And then once I'm on this page, I'm going to go under Configuration and click on Data API. And this page contains the necessary information to connect to our Supabase project from our React application. So to complete this process, we need to first install Supabase within our React application. And we can do this by opening up our terminal and typing in npm install at supabase.js or supabase/supabase-js. And I'll hit enter, and after you give it a second or two, it should finish installing. Next, we're going to create a folder called helper within our source directory in our React project. So I'll just click the new folder icon and create the helper folder. And then within this helper folder, I'm going to create a file called Supabase client.js. And this is the file where we will create an instance of our Supabase project within our React application. And we're going to be doing this by adding the necessary credentials on the right window here. So first, I'm going to start writing the code, and I'll explain it to you along the way. So first, we need to import create client, which will allow us to create an instance of our Supabase project within our React application. And we're going to import it from @supabase/Supabase.js, which is the dependency that we just installed. Then I'm going to create a variable called Supabase URL, and this is going to contain the project URL on the right here. So I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm going to set this equal to a string and paste in the URL. And then I'm going to create another variable that's going to contain the Supabase anonymous key. So I'll just name the Supabase anon key, and this is going to be equal to the anonymous key here. So I'm going to copy it, and then I'll paste it. And now we have these two variables defined. Now, if you're planning on deploying this application, you want to ensure that your URL and anonymous key are stored in a .env file so that they're not hard-coded into your application. But since this is just a tutorial, I'm going to do it this way because it is simpler to explain. And now that we have these variables, we're going to create our Supabase instance. So to do this, I'm just going to do const Supabase and set this equal to create client, which is what we're going to use to establish an instance within our React application. And we're going to pass in the Supabase URL, and then we're going to pass in the Supabase anonymous key. And line 7 right here, this line, will allow us to create an instance of our Supabase project so that we can access it remotely from our React app. And this will also be the same instance that we use to perform database operations, and this is done by passing in the Supabase URL, which is the RESTful endpoint for querying and managing our database, while the anonymous key is to securely access our database. And now that we have this done, we need to export this variable so that we can import it in other files and access this instance created using create client from Supabase so that we can continue with developing our application. So I'll do export default Supabase. Now we're going to set up our database table. So to do this, I'm going to head to the sidebar here, and I'm going to click Table Editor. And here within the public schema, which you can select here, make sure that it is set to public, we're going to click Create a New Table. And the name for our table will be to-dos, since this table will contain to-dos from our to-do list. And we're also going to uncheck row level security. And the reason that we are doing this, despite Supabase recommending to keep it checked, is because we are currently in development mode. We're developing a web app, and since we may run into errors and have to debug them, it is better to leave this option off to simplify testing or troubleshooting. However, once we have completed development, we must turn this option back on to simplify the implementation of security logic within our application and enhance security by preventing unauthorized access. And then for our columns, we're going to have the two default columns that indicate the ID of the to-do using an integer, which can be useful when selecting a particular to-do for deletion once we've completed the task. And the created at column is useful to identify when the task was created. But we also need to know what the name of the task is as well, right? So we're going to add a column, and this column will be named title to indicate what the title of our to-do is, and the data type for this column will of course be text. And the default value will be set to null, and we're also going to set the isUnique option to be true so that we do not have two or more of the same tasks. And we do not have to worry about foreign keys at the moment since there are no relations with other tables. So now we can just click save to create this table. And if you give it a few seconds, it will create this table. And now we are ready to work on our actual application. Now, while we did create our table and are ready to begin working on our application, I made a silly mistake and forgot to add another column. So if you click the three ellipses and click Edit Table, we're going to add a new column, and this column is going to indicate whether the task has been completed or not. So the name for this column is just going to be completed, and since this is a Boolean, we're going to select bool as our data type, and the default value is going to be false, because if we are creating a new task, then it can be assumed that that task has not been completed, so therefore the default value for that task is going to be set to false. So then we'll hit save, and after it's been updated, we're finally ready to work on our application. Alright, so now we're going to start developing our application. So to do this, I'm going to first head to my app.css file, and I'm going to remove all of the CSS within this file. I'm also going to remove everything from index.css, and I'm going to delete app.css. And I'll also remove the index.css import in main.jsx, and also delete index.css. And if you guys would like to add any sort of styling, feel free to do that on your own, but in this video I will not be doing any styling, since I'm here to provide you an explanation as to how you can create a project with Supabase. So I'm going to head to my app.js file, and I'm going to remove all of the boilerplate code here, and I'm going to use the RFCE snippet to create a function component. And then I'm going to start up my application by doing npm run dev, and I'm going to open my application at localhost port 5173. So I'll just copy this, and then I'll paste this in a new tab, and here we have our current web page. Now, the goal right now is to import the necessary dependencies that we need to create this project, along with setting up the elements on our web page. So I'm going to first import useState and useEffect, which are going to be necessary hooks for this application, and you'll see why they're going to be used in a few moments. If you don't understand what either of these do, I have videos that cover the function of both useState and useEffect, so you can check that out on the top right hand corner of the screen. Then I'm going to import Supabase, which is going to be imported from the helper Supabase client file, because this is where we created our Supabase instance. And then after we do this, I'm going to create two useState variables. So one of them is going to include the list of to-dos. So remember that we need to fetch all of our to-dos, and those to-dos that we fetch from Supabase are going to be stored in this list, so that this array essentially can display those to-dos on the web page, and we'll have a section for completed to-dos and a section for incomplete to-dos. And we'll be able to use a few filtering features to distinguish between which to-dos we're going to be displaying. But for right now, let's create the useState variable. So we'll do const to-dos, then set to-dos. And this will be equal to useState, and it will, by default, be an empty array. And then we're going to set title. So every time that we input a new to-do, we're going to have a specific title in an input field, and we're going to need a useState variable to keep track of this title. So for right now, these are the two variables that we need. We're going to be adding more code here as we go along with developing our application. The next step is to develop a basic web page that contains all the elements that we need for our application. So I'm going to first create a div, and then within this div I'll have an h1 header that says to-do list, and we can see that updated to the right there. And then below this h1 header, I'm going to create an input field, and this input field's value is going to be binded with the title useState variable here. And then I'm also going to add an onChange function so that every time that we enter in a key press into this input field, we are updating the title state variable to have the title of our task stored within this variable. This is just going to have an arrow function that'll just do set title to e.target.value. And then I'm also going to add a placeholder to this input. So we'll just call this add a new to do. Okay, and you see that form right here. And then we're going to create a button as well that allows us to add this to do, and it's right next to the input box. Next, we're going to create our section for our incomplete to-dos. So we'll do this by doing h2 incomplete to-dos, and here we're going to have a div, and within this div we're just going to filter all of the to-dos from our to-dos list, and then we're going to map the incomplete to-dos to a div tag that will contain a span that contains the to-dos title, along with a button that will allow us to complete that to-do, update that to-do, and delete that to-do. Okay, but this is something that we're going to implement later on. And the next section would be the set of completed to-dos. So we'll do completed to-dos, and then this one is also going to behave in the same manner as the incomplete to-dos, except this is going to be for completed to-dos, of course. So our next step is to, of course, add a to-do, right? So to add a to-do, what we need to do is create a function that allows us to add an entry to our database. So what I'm going to do is within my function component, I'm going to create a function called async function add to do. Okay, and this function is going to basically check if we have a title for our to do currently. So we'll do if the trimmed version of that title does not exist, then we're just going to end the execution of the function. However, if there is a title present, then we're going to add that to do. Now Supabase is going to basically work in this way. So we'll do const error, and this error will essentially pop up if we run into any errors, right? If there are no errors, then the function will execute and will add the to-do to our database. Here what I'll do is await supabase.from, because we're trying to access our to-dos table. We're going to insert a to-do, and inserting this to-do is essentially going to be an array, and then we're going to pass in a curly bracket, and this curly bracket is going to contain the title, and the value for completed is going to be set to false by default, so there's no need to actually write completed there. Okay, and then if there is an error, then we're just going to do console.error error. Oops. Otherwise, we're going to empty the set title field so that we can clear it for a new entry, and let's see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to say new to do, let's say make a YouTube video and add it, and the field did not clear, so that means we have ran into an error. So here it says you provided a value prop to a form field without an onChange handler. This will render a read-only field. Okay, so the reason that this error is occurring is because we don't have a function that this button calls. We've created this function called add to do, which will allow us to add to-dos to our database, but there's no element within our web page that's actually calling it. So what we need to do is basically add an on-click event to this button, and when we click this button, we're just going to call the add to do function. Okay, so let's retry this, and our input field has cleared, meaning that we did not run into any error. Now we're going to access our Supabase database. So I'm going to go here, and if you give it a moment to refresh, it's going to show you the to-do, right? So our to-do was make a YouTube video, and you can see that is here within our database. So that means that our add to-do function is working. Now, although we have added this to-do, we also need to render it. And by the way, you can notice that the completed value is set to false by default, okay? But back to what I was initially saying, we need to display this to-do on the web page, right? And it is currently an incomplete to-do. So to display to-dos in the first place, we need to fetch the to-dos, okay? So fetching the to-dos is fairly simple. We're just going to create another asynchronous function that's going to help us fetch to-dos. So I'll do async function fetch to-dos. And here we're going to do const data error. And the reason that we have data here is because we're going to expect data to be returned, okay? Because we are fetching to-dos. So we're going to do await supabase.from to-dos. We're going to select all of the to-dos, which is indicated by this asterisk, and then we're going to order them in ascending order, okay? So order by created at, where ascending is equal to true, all right? And hopefully this makes it easier to see. So if we have an error, then we're going to console.error that error. Otherwise, if we have data, which is going to indicate that our API call to Supabase was successful, we're going to set our empty array of to-dos to contain the to-dos that are within this data, which is going to be to-dos from our Supabase project. So to do this, we'll just do else set to-dos to data. Okay, and then now we need to call this fetch to-dos function. Now, when we render our web page here, we need to, by default, call this fetch to-dos function. So to do that, we're going to have a use effect, and on the initial render of the component, which is why I've passed in this dependency array, which is empty at the end, we're going to call the fetch to-dos function so that it runs on the initial render, okay? And we're also going to copy this fetch to-dos function call and also add it after we have cleared the title upon adding a to-do, so that once we have added a to-do, that to-do is also fetched from the database and then is updating the to-dos state variable here, okay? Now, for any of these changes to appear, we need to also update them on our web page. So earlier I created these two sections for incomplete and complete to-dos, and what I'm going to do is just write the code for them, and I'll explain to you what it means. So I'll do to-dos.filter, and then we'll do t, and then t.not completed to-dos. We're going to map each to-do to a div tag, and this div tag is going to have a key of to-do.id, and then each div tag is going to contain the to-do's title, so to-do.title, and then we're going to have a button for completing it, and then a button for updating, and a button for deleting it, okay? And right here, you can see that as soon as we saved our code, this make a YouTube video to-do has popped up within our incomplete to-dos list. So if I were to add another to-do, let's say upload, or edit YouTube video, sorry, and add it, what happens here is once I click this add button, it's going to insert a to-do with this title to the to-dos table, and if we receive any sort of error, it's going to console log that error, but if it clears this text field, which is done by the set title to an empty string, then that means that this to-do has been added. And then it's going to call the fetch to-dos function, which should update our incomplete to-dos section as well. So we'll do add, and you can see that edit YouTube video is also appearing here. So our next step is to write the code to display the completed to-dos and also delete to-dos, and we're going to do update to-dos last. So now we're going to work on completing to-dos. So to complete to-dos, we need to create a function that will allow us to complete to-dos, right? So to do this, what we're going to do is create a function called complete to-do. So we'll do async function complete to-do, And this function, we're going to need to take in the ID of the to-do so that we know which to-do we are marking as completed, and we can pass in this ID to update this entry in the database. Okay, so we're going to take in an ID for this function, and then we'll just have await supabase.from to-dos. We're going to update the field, or update the column for completed and set it to true for the ID that is equal to the ID that is passed in. Okay, so let me just reiterate. We are accessing the to-dos table here, and then we're going to update the completed column to be set to true for the to-do that has an ID column that is equal to the value that is passed in the complete to-do function. And then after we do complete to-do, we're going to run fetch to-dos once again. Now let me explain why. When we update a record in our database, the previous array that is set into this to-dos state variable by fetch to-dos on the initial render or after we add a to-do is prior to us marking a to-do completed. So when we mark a to-do as completed, we have updated a entry in our database. And to ensure that our to-dos list also features that same updated list of entries, we need to call the fetch to-dos function once again so that we retrieve the entries that have updates applied to them. So now what we need to do is assign this complete to-do function to the complete button, and then we're going to add the code to display the completed to-dos. Okay, so we'll go to the complete button here, and then we're just going to do on click, and then we'll do an arrow function, and this is simply going to do complete to-do, and then we're just going to pass in to-do.id, which is going to be accessed from the individual to-do that we map. And then we're going to also write the code for completed to-dos. And the code for displaying the completed to-dos is basically the same as the code for this here, but there are a few differences. So I'm going to just copy the code for incomplete, and the changes that we're going to make is remove this exclamation symbol. And just to reiterate what this part does, we're essentially taking the to-dos state variable that contains the array of to-dos, and then we're going to filter through each to-do, and each to-do is referenced with this parameter t, and we're basically telling the code, I'm accessing the to-dos array, but I want to specifically filter and retain the to-dos that are marked as completed. And once I have all those completed to-dos, I'm going to map each of those to-dos to a div tag that contains information about that to-do. So that's essentially what this code does. And then for the completed to-do section, we're no longer going to need the complete button because this is a completed to-do, so there's no necessity for that. And we also don't need the update button as well. We're only going to need delete in case the user wants to clear out their completed to-do. So now that we've added this code, let's actually test this out. So let's say that I mark making a YouTube video as complete, and here you can see that after we click the complete button, it triggered this complete to-do function, and what it did was update the record of this make a YouTube video task from the complete value being set to false by default to being set to true. And it ensured that the only to-do that was affected was the to-do with the ID of the make a YouTube video to-do. And then after that was done, we called fetch to-dos, which caused a change in the to-do state variable, which is what our completed to-dos section relies on to display to-dos. Sorry if that was a mouthful, but hopefully this makes sense and it's starting to add up. So now if we go back to our database and view that same entry and scroll to the end, you can see that the make a YouTube video to do is now set to true. And now we can add the feature for deleting a to-do as well. For deleting a to-do, this is also very simple to do. It's going to be very similar to our update to-do function. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this function here. I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to rename it to delete to-do. And instead of updating a to-do, we are going to be deleting a to-do that has the same ID as the ID that is passed in. And again, since we are deleting a record from our database, that means we must update our to-dos state variable that contains all of our to-dos, and we do that by calling the fetch to-dos function again. And then now that we have the delete to-do function created, we need to assign this function to the delete buttons here. So to do that, I'm just going to go to button here, and I'm just going to do on click, same code, or similar code as the complete to-do. And then we're going to pass in the to-do.id. And what I'll do is I'll just copy this button element and I'll paste it here as well. Okay, so now let's see what happens when we press delete. Okay, so we are supposed to be deleting a record from the database. Let's say that I have made the YouTube video and it's completed, but I want to clear out my completed list of to-dos. So I just click delete, and what happens is that this button fired this delete to-do function, which took in the ID of the to-do that I just deleted, and it made sure to delete that to-do from the to-dos table, and it ensured that the to-do that was deleted had an ID that matched the ID that was passed in, and then it called the fetch to-dos, which is why this completed to-do section is updated. Well, let's say that we do the same thing for our incomplete to-dos, and I delete this one, same thing happens. And if we go back to our database, you can see that after it refreshed, all of our entries were deleted. So now we can work on updating our to-do, and we will be done with building our app. So now to update our to-dos, we need to write a function that will allow us to update the to-do. So this function is going to be called update to-do, and like all of our other functions that are interacting with our database, this one is also going to be asynchronous. So we're going to do async function update to-do. Now, with our previous functions, we've only been performing updates that are related to completing the to-do, deleting the to-do, but for this one, we're trying to update the to-do. So this essentially means that we need not only the ID of the to-do that we're trying to update, but we also need additional information. And that additional information is the updated title for our task. So that is the reason why we're going to have not only the ID, but also a new title passed in as a parameter to this function. Then we're going to do await supabase.from, and then update the title to the new title, where the ID is equal to the ID passed in. So just to reiterate, what this function is going to do is it's going to select a to-do from the to-dos table that is equal to the ID of the to-do that we are trying to update, and it's going to update the title attribute to be the new title that we have updated our to-do to. And then after we've done this, we're going to want to fetch the rows from the to-dos table that are most up to date. So we're going to do that by calling the fetch to-dos function once again. And now that we have the update to-do function, we need to call this function using the update button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll to where this update button is here. And here I'm just going to write an on-click event. And it's essentially going to be an arrow function that calls the update to-do function. Now for the update to-do function, the first parameter is going to be the ID of the to-do. So we'll just do to-do.id. And then to actually update it, we're going to prompt the user in the web browser what the new title is that they want. So we're going to do prompt and then new title, and this will just have a value of the current title. So now let's give this a try. So I'm going to first add a new to-do. Let's just call this promote YouTube video. And I add it, but let's say I want to update the title. So I click update. And after I click update, what happens is that this prompt is called here. So when this prompt is called, it gives me the prompt new title. And by default, it's going to have the initial title, which is why you see promote YouTube video here. But once I change this title, so let's say that I change this to share YouTube video, what's going to happen is that after clicking OK, this prompt function is going to return a value that is equal to share YouTube video, which then serves as the new title. And that will essentially complete the call for this update to-do function, which is basically going to use the to-do ID to retrieve the to-do that we are trying to update and pass in this new title and update the title column. So we're going to click OK, and then after clicking OK, we called the fetch to-dos function after the database update was made, and the fetch to-dos function essentially replaced everything that was within this to-dos list, and it replaced it with all of the new updated entries. And you can see that the update was made, and you can see share YouTube video as the title. And if we want to see this in our database as well, you can go and head over to Supabase, and if you go to the to-do table, you can see that the title is Share YouTube Video. All right, so that sums up this video. I hope this video gave you a thorough introduction to Supabase. Now, if you're planning on creating another application with Supabase and want to deploy it, please make sure that you enable RLS policies after you have completed the development of your application. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comments section or send me an email and I'll do my best to reply. I've been a bit busy with junior year of high school, so I apologize. However, if you were able to learn something from this video, please give the video a like and subscribe to my channel for more uploads like this. As always, have a nice day and I'll see you in the next one.